Welcome to another episode of Nacoa's Lunchtime Lives, a series of live interviews where I speak to people that have advocated for Nacoa and COAs around the world. And I was super excited about this interview that you're about to watch with the incredibly funny, charismatic and charming Marcus Brigstocke. We had an incredible conversation actually, and I don't think anybody was, or certainly I wasn't necessarily sure where the interview was going to go, but we talked about Marcus's own experiences of his own relationship with alcohol, having been sober for 30 years. We talked about the play that he's written called The Red that you can gain access to if you're watching this during the time frame that it's going live. I'm sure we'll put the links all for that down below in the comments section of this video. But we talk about that, and the play is about his relationship with his father, or is actually is based around his relationship with his father, having been somebody that quits alcohol. The interview is brilliant. We talk about so much different things in so many different ways, and I really enjoyed it. There's some humour throughout it, obviously, with Marcus being on our screens as a comedian since the 90s, and really sit back and take this one in and watch the whole interview, because it goes lots of different places. If this is the first time you've ever been here, please do make sure that you have subscribed, turn on those notifications as well, so you know that every time that we post a new video. Sit back and enjoy this interview. There you go.
I'm here.
Easy.
Does everything work?
Simple. Everything works. I can hear you and see you clearly.
Awesome.
Can you hear and see me clearly?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. Then we can get into this. I'm actually probably for the first time ever doing this a little bit nervous.
All right, good stuff, man. Nice. I hope that's going to trip you in the direction of like really awkward questions that you don't mean to be aggressive or anything, but just like come blurting out. Like, yeah. Who do you think you are anyway? That kind of thing.
There'll be a few of them, and
all right.
at least with these nerves as well, we're going to be talking about something that's quite sensitive in some cases as well. So it will give me plenty of opportunity to mess up and drop some absolute horrendous questions on you.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a second here to introduce you and to tell people why you're on. So I'm going to say a little bit of a few words here, and then we'll start by jumping in, and you can tell us a little bit about the play, which I'm going to mention here. So you are Marcus Brigstocke, a comedian who's been on our screen since the 90s. Which makes me feel a little bit old because I kind of grew up watching you on screen back then. But the main reason that we've got you here today is for a play that you've just written called The Red. It's a bittersweet drama of family and addiction based on your own recovery. And that's going to be streaming by the original theatre company from March the 16th through to the 16th of June. And what we're going to do is put some links in the comments when this goes on our grid, and also through all of our kind of social media stuff. People can get themselves a discount code to go and see us. So why don't I give it over to you to just tell us a little bit about The Red, how it came about and exactly what it is.
Sure. Hi everybody, thanks very much. And whoever typed "I don't smoke the reefer" into the thing there, nice one. My number 11 chart smash, but we're not talking about that now. So The Red is a play that I meant to write for a really long time and didn't, because it was very emotional and quite challenging to do. But fundamentally, it was looking at two things. And the first is what happens in an addict's head when they're in recovery. What's the monologue like that compels you, even years after you've got sober, to consider going back to the thing that caused you so much harm? What does it feel like? Like, most addicts will tell you with some clarity what it's like in the first day or week or 6 months or year, but slightly fewer will tell you what it's like in my case, to be 30 years sober. You know,
30. It's 30.
30. I got sober when I was 17, so I've never had a legal drink in my life. So my problems with addiction began when I was very young. So, so really the play is a little bit about that, but it's more than anything about the relationship between a father and a son. So my dad is alive and he loves wine so much. He adores wine, and he may be an alcoholic, but I doubt it. And if he is, he's happy and causes no harm. And he's a kind, generous man. And so I'm like, well, if you're okay, then that's all right by me, you know. And I think in the world there are some people who are problem drinkers and problem drug addicts and whatever else. For, you know, they kind of make it work and they don't leave a trail of devastation behind them. So really, the plot of the Red is pretty simple. On the day of his dad's funeral, Ben, the main character, is instructed to open a letter from his dad in his father's beautiful and very well stocked wine cellar. And the letter says, there's a lot of wine here. It's worth a lot of money and you should sell it because your recovery is really, really important. And you've been an alcoholic in recovery for a very long time and you should sell this wine, spend it on something nice. And there's a bottle from the year of your birth, a 1976 Chateau Lafite Rothschild. It has a little string tied around the neck, and I bought it when you were 2, and I think you should drink it, and I think you'll be okay. And by the way, it's fine if you don't, and I'll still love you. And as he's reading the letter, the father's voice and body appears not as a ghost, but as a representation of what's occurring to Ben through this letter. And everything that follows then is Benjamin's negotiation with himself about drinking and not drinking. What would happen? Why did I stop? Why is wine so fucking special? You know, wine is this social glue, and I see this when I go and visit with my parents, and you know, and I love them, and I really love how much they love wine, and it's in the play. His dad's talking about it, and he ends up going, "Oh, I don't know," and Benjamin says, "I do." You're able to talk to people without saying a word because you're sharing something special, and I can't be a part of that. And I feel this with my family. You know, they love wine. They like drinking, sure, but they love wine, and it is a social glue. And we talk about that in the play. This thing of like, what'll you have? What are we eating? We're having fish. I've got a lovely white, you know, and all of that stuff. And it's just people just breathe it, particularly with wine. And how Benjamin is excluded from that. And then also another, I think, very important part of the play for me is a moment where his father explains to him, and this is based on a real conversation I had with my dad, that once he got into recovery, once Ben was in recovery, his dad didn't know how to be a father to him anymore. Because what use could he be? Because Ben already had a whole system in place, you know, and people will say that to you in recovery. They'll be like, you know, you can't choose your birth family, but you can choose the rest of it. And my dad said to me one day at a wedding, my cousin's wedding, while a band played Moni Moni in the background, he said, I haven't been much of a father to you. And I didn't lie and rescue him and go, yeah, you have, you've been amazing. And he genuinely said to me, you know, after you got sober, I realized you've had everything you needed. And I didn't know how I could be a part of that. And it's made me so sad now to think about it. It breaks my heart because I'm a dad to 2 teenage kids and to a baby. And to think that we might ever reach a point where I'm no use to them anymore is so sad. And it is true, you know, when I began my recovery from addiction, I needed to put in place things that my parents, through no fault of their own, were not able to do for me because my brain is an addict's brain, and you know, and that needs a particular kind of looking after, which is my responsibility now in my life as a father, as a child to my parents, as a brother to my brother and sister and their partners, and you know, particularly as a parent, you know, I consider perhaps more than any other factor that my sobriety is for me first. And if it isn't, then I think I'd run into trouble really quickly. But very soon after, for me, it's for my kids. Essential for them that I don't relapse, like the effects of relapsing into alcohol or drug addiction particularly are quick and they're catastrophic. Addiction's kept a pretty firm grip on my life throughout my recovery, and there are other aspects of my life where addictive behaviors come up and they ebb and flow. And they've I would say that the end of my first marriage was fairly largely caused by my not paying enough attention to my recovery. Not exclusively, but it was a big part of it. But I do think, alcohol and drugs particularly, they're no worse than the other things I've been addicted to in my life, but they do get catastrophic very quickly.
That's the difference, right, with addiction. So when I'm like processing and listening to everything that you've said, by the way, I was 24 when I got sober. So I would have been sober myself 10 years now. I thought I was young, by the way, when I got sober. But to get sober at 17, and based on what you said, I remember sitting down with my stepdad. Now, my dad died as a result of his drinking when I was 9, but my stepdad, who I'd always been quite close to and was able to relate to in the pub, watching football and having a good drink. I do remember when I finally decided to quit myself, having that conversation with him and feeling like there was a big loss of connection as he sort of looked at me and said, "You can't do this anymore, can you?" And I said, "No." And he didn't know where to go. And I don't think we've ever really fully reconciled where to go with that. Did you feel as a 17-year-old, because I can imagine based on what I've read and what you've said about your dad, that he may have been really looking forward to your 18th birthday and taking you out. Did you feel like, was there even a bit of you that thought maybe I should go until I'm 18 to kind of do that? I know that might sound ridiculous. But...
Well, no, it's not ridiculous at all. And by the way, congratulations, man.
Thank you, and likewise to you.
No, listen. Once I'd made contact with the people who were about to help me deal with my addiction, I was so young that I don't think I really knew what I was sort of signing up for per se. But I got a whiff of it, and initially I was like, "Yes, please God help me. I'm in so much pain here." And then as soon as I thought I was really going to get help, I was like, "Well, here's the thing. Shall we?" Because December the 5th is my clean time anniversary. I was like, "Why don't we do this? Let's at least wait until Christmas is done. Am I right?" I genuinely, I think the state I was in, I'd not given any thought to my 18th or 21st or anything like that. But I definitely was aware, I was in a residential rehab center for the first part of my recovery. And I remember going to them and going, I thought I might leave for a bit and go back to where I lived and see my mates over the Christmas New Year period, and then I will absolutely be back. And they were like, okay, well no, and that's a hard pass. So, and but so I got very sober. I got sober, very sober. Well, I did get very sober. I lived like I had nothing else going on in my life, so I lived deep in recovery. And let's be clear, like I was an obnoxious twat. I was what I needed to be. I was what I needed to be. And one of the things I talk about this a tiny bit in the play is that addicts, it's really sad, it kind of breaks my heart, but you'll know, right? Getting sober and not just getting sober, but living in recovery it's, forgive the self-pity for a moment, it's so hard. It is so hard. It's exhausting, and you have to stay in your pain when you're in pain, and you have to stay in your fear when you're in fear. You have to just live with it and let it be and not escape from it and not turn away. And when you get into any sort of conflict, you have to address, well, which are the defects in me that have caused this? You don't get to spend any time going, oh, those people, no. You got to take responsibility, right? It's so hard, but we are only fighting to get back to normal. So the heroic struggle that and it is heroic. Forgive me tooting my recovery horn, but it is the heroic struggle that we're involved with is only ever getting us back to a bare minimum of decency, where we're not lying to absolutely everybody who loves us, right? So as a story, that's quite difficult to address. And I know every addict I see who's a day sober or 20 days or 20 years or whatever, I'm like, good on you. That's amazing. I see it. I know. But we mustn't expect those around us to be like, oh my God, you're so great. You're so amazing. I know how hard you try. Because the hard we're trying is just to reach 100, just to reach like a bare minimum of human decency, of connection, of not lying, of not stealing, not cheating, and not causing chaos and harming those around us. That's pretty tough. But the reason I mention that about like what that's like and why recovery is, some of the ways in which recovery is hard and the exposure you have and all the rest of it is, you know, I'm grateful for being an addict. Genuinely, a lot of addicts put that on their gratitude list for their sponsors' benefit and not for their own. You know, I'm really grateful to be an addict today. It's one of my favorite things in meetings when people go and they're like, I'm just like really grateful at the moment. You're like, you don't fucking sound grateful, man.
You don't look it.
That's not what gratitude sounds like. But I'm grateful for being an addict, especially, you know, pandemic and parenthood and the war in Ukraine and the rest of it. I have a place to go with all my stuff. I really do. Like everything that happens, I've a place to go. I have people I can ring, people I've met sometimes for the duration of one meeting who I could ring and tell the worst things I've ever done to and the worst thoughts I'm having and have them understand instantly. Like that's such a gift. It's amazing. But there is no doubt I needed 12-step recovery. I needed to get sober. That was essential. And I am certain that I would be dead if that hadn't happened. And I'm also certain that before I died, I'd have caused a lot of harm to those around me. And my death would have broken the hearts of a great many people who love me. But going into recovery also caused huge damage to me, massive damage, because I was 17 and I didn't know how then to be a teenager. And I didn't really know how to live out my adolescence. And I didn't really know how to be in my early 20s. And I didn't really know how to relate to people who weren't in recovery. And I didn't really understand how to live in a world. And this comes back to the connection between my father and I and my mum and the rest of my family, and drinking and you know, other stuff, but drinking particularly. Like, where's my place in all of that? You know, so I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't go back. And I don't think I'd even choose to not be an addict, because here we are, you know. Why wish away what is now a wonderful life that I live? But it did really screw me up. And I think it's important to, it took me a long time to recognize that, you know, that recovery is what addicts need and can be wonderful, really magical, and also really destructive in its own way, in just the same way that chemotherapy is really tough, right?
Yeah, right.
You need, and it'll cure or kill your cancer cells, and it's really tough, and it'll make you vomit, and it'll make your hair fall out, and it'll make you exhausted. Well, you know, recovery won't make your hair fall out, but it does have downsides. It has downsides for people around you as well. When I said I was a twat for the first few years of my recovery, I certainly was. We're not supposed to take other people's inventory, but I walked into every room I walked into and just issue scanned the room. And this is before discussions about mental health were what they are now. But I just walked in and I'm like, well, I'm glad I'm not you. You're an addict. I'm glad I'm not waking up in any part of your life, you know. And
Yeah, yeah.
I would overshare with people, and I would use therapy talk to punish people I disagreed with, and I would wave my recovery around like, you know, like this great burden that I was carrying that others should, you know, exhausting for all of them.
Yeah, I remember my mum saying to me, probably, I don't know, in the first year or two, why don't you just have a drink? And I remember saying to people, they just don't get it. People around me just don't get it, right? They're just telling me to have a drink. And
Yeah,
like what was actually being communicated to me was, in some ways, you were better off when you were drinking, right?
yeah,
In obviously that's not the case, but because of how I was, and I talk about how in my first year, I used to go down the pub in a white robe, metaphorically, yeah, and sandals, telling everybody in there they should be drinking Coke like me, right? Because I'm
yeah, yeah, yeah,
24 and I've been sober, and like
yeah,
sort of almost I hid behind a guise of to save the world, or perhaps it wasn't a guise, and there was some truth in it, right? But actually, it was that stuff that you're talking about, and it's difficult, right? It's tricky in those years. It's tricky the relationships as well, and it must have been, and I guess this is what a lot of the Red is about, right? The relationship, because I've read some of it, right?
yeah,
And I even in the first little bit that I read, I see that kind of tricky where the father is saying you can drink it, but you don't have to type thing, and it's like there's a sense of wanting to create that bond, right?
absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And like, you know, the narrative of the play is that it swings this way and then this way and this way and this way. So every time Benedict looks like he's gonna drink, his father pulls him back. And every time he's certain that he mustn't drink, his father's like, yeah, but hang on, look at why. I mean, he says, you know, but you'd so enjoy it. You're a person who loves the fine things in life, and God knows you deserve them, you know, and all of this stuff, all of these compelling kind of ideas that play in my life and in my mind. And so it kind of oscillates. And yeah, like for a whole bunch of people, they're not talking to me as a recovering alcoholic when they say just have a drink. What they're doing is something they can do, which is playing with the fantasy that I might suddenly discover that I'm fine, you know,
Mm,
and that would be easier for everybody. They're like, oh, that was great that you did all those years of sobriety, and by the way, double great that while you did that, it cured you,
mm,
and now isn't it lovely that you are now able to have a nice glass of red with dinner? Isn't that
mm.
lovely? You know, and like that's exactly what they talk about in the thing. And you know, a long way into my recovery, I still weigh that decision up on a, you know, on a daily basis. I'm like, well, sure, I think a nice glass of red would be tremendous. I'm also still, mercifully, just for today, absolutely persuaded that it would be opening the door to something that is not worth it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Even if I say, well, maybe it wouldn't be catastrophic ever, or for a year or so, or perhaps like lots of alcoholics make the negotiation that once I get really old and my children are not dependent on me and it really doesn't matter and I go away somewhere, that, you know, I could get quite pissed and I think it would probably be fine. You know, most of us make a deal about, well, once I'm 80 it won't matter if I kill myself with alcohol or something, you know.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but just for today, I am still at, okay, well, I'd really like to have a whatever it may be, something later on, a glass of wine or something, and I'm absolutely persuaded that it's just not worth it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
And I think,
this is another element to, you know, as a sponsor in 12-step recovery, I try to get my sponsees to move fairly swiftly through the 12 steps. You know, it's 12 steps for a reason. Get to the top
mm,
of them. The view from the top pretty decent. The view from halfway up looks roughly like all of the views from all of the staircases you've ever been on. It ain't great halfway up. It's great
No.
from the top. And those around you, by the way, will not benefit from you being halfway into your fucking recovery.
No.
Don't just get sober. That's shit for everybody, including you. Be in recovery and live it. And then my questions are all, well, how are you living? And I'm aware always of and it's why people encourage sponsorship. It's why the program encourages sponsorship. But like, I'm aware of the hypocrisy. But my question for a lot of my sponsees over the years when they're having problems is, what novel are you reading at the moment? Not which pages in the AA Big Book did you read to get better. Half the time, if you're in established recovery, what you need in order to stay sober is not to focus harder on your recovery, but to live a life that you wish to be sober for, right?
Yeah.
And that can be really hard to do because the gaze turns inwards. And as we have better and better conversations about mental health in society generally, and it's fantastic that we're having those discussions, there's an inherent danger with that, and that is that the gaze turns inwards and a person just begins to describe themselves primarily as an alcoholic or primarily as a person living with anxiety or whatever. And that's not to demean any of the importance of those, not the labels, but understanding what those things mean. But it is to say, well, sure, you're an anxious person, or you're a depressed person, or you're an addict, or you're an alcoholic, or whatever. Now what? What's next for you? How are you going to live today? What you going to do?
Yeah.
Because for me, I'm lucky. I found a job that I adore, and my job involves making things, and it makes me quite scared sometimes, a bit resentful sometimes, and tired often. But you know, I'm lucky that the job I have really fills my heart, fills my soul. But I do ask that question of my sponsees. I'm like, well, what you going to do now? It's no good. It's no good just being sober.
Yeah, and I think that I really resonate with what you say about labels, because I think that, like, for me, if you take the term alcoholic, right, it was really good for me right at the beginning to be like, I am an alcoholic, right? But then at some point, I need to move to the stage where I stop hanging my hat on that every single time I make a mistake, right? I can't just keep going, well, it's just because I'm an alcoholic. Look, I did this stupid thing. I need to actually move forward, right? I recognize this, and now how do I move to some kind of change? And I've done that with, you know, all kinds of labels. I did it with anxiety is another great one. Well, I just get anxiety. That's why I haven't left the house for 5 days. But at some point, I need to move beyond it. And I think the thing that, because you started off by saying right at the beginning of the conversation about the addiction, or kind of, I think you said addictions that you've had since you stopped using alcohol. And I always recognize when people say to me, do you think you could have just one drink? I always sort of say to them, possibly for a little while. I was at the garage yesterday and bought 2 chocolate bars and secretly ate them in the car and disposed of the rubbish before I got home without anybody knowing that I'd ate the chocolate. And I'm doing that with chocolate 10 years after not drinking, right? So I'm aware how when something does what I want it to do for me, I'm aware how quickly I become secretive about it and start wanting to use it, right?
Listen, if you wanna see a recovering alcoholic or recovering drug addict wince and their eyes get really big in their head, ask them how much porn they look at.
Yeah, exactly, right.
The epidemic of porn addiction amongst men particularly, but by no means exclusively, and I do mean epidemic of porn addiction, is running wild. And if you understand, I stopped looking at porn. I've been completely clean from all titillating imagery online, like totally scrupulously clean from all of that stuff for over 5 years now.
Wow.
When I looked at what that does to the human brain, but the male brain particularly, how it's built. So every image you look at, including a thumbnail invitation to look at the next thing, registers in the human brain, male brain particularly, as a sexual opportunity and fires a small amount of dopamine into your brain, right?
Wow.
That's
Right.
potential
Yeah,
sexual
yeah.
partner. That's how we evolve. Bang, bang, bang. Dopamine, 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 dopamine. And it's not about, of course, it's about sex somewhat. And of course, porn is what porn is. But actually, what's happening to all brains, addict brains or otherwise, is you're damaging your ability to process dopamine. And your phone is the same, right?
Mm.
So the message, the Facebook, the Instagram, the text, the Snapchat, the email, even the work email, all of them register in the human brain with a small release of dopamine, just tiny, just a little opportunity. It's how we evolved, right? We evolved in little wandering tribes, and the human brain built itself to respond to each social interaction with possibility mostly of getting food or sex. And from food or sex, you can also come back to, well, work opportunities and social opportunities and all the rest of it. So the flood of dopamine that we experience in our brains now, using our phones and our laptops, somewhat the TV, and most specifically porn, is way more than any of us are built for at this stage. And for me, and that's what I mean when I say my addictions, you know, it's the whack-a-mole thing. Everyone's familiar with this, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
My addictions are perfectly capable, even when I'm living pretty deep in like meaningful recovery, connected recovery, you know, sponsor relationship meetings, taking personal inventory, showing up, writing gratitude lists, praying in some form or another, meditating. I can be a long way into that and still be an addict running my life really out of control, because actually because it's quite a sensible thing to do,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because we ought to seek comfort where we can find it, right? So the earliest manifestation of my addiction was in food. And actually, if you scratch the surface with most alcoholics, and particularly drug addicts, and really get them to examine what was your eating like before you found drugs or alcohol, most will be like, first off, they'll be like, leave me alone. And then they'll be like, it was really bad. And because, you know, food has a massive effect on our brain. I mean, for a kickoff, we've got a 7.5-month-old baby sleeping downstairs, and we're weaning him right now. And here's the message with every mouthful: good boy, good boy,
Yeah.
good boy, aren't you good? Look what daddy made for you. Here's another one. And then he's too little to understand it, but with his mum, instantly he was so good. And then as they get bigger, as we get bigger, look what daddy made for you, look what mummy made for you. And if you, then you can have approval, 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 love, 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 right? And that's all good. There's nothing wrong with that. No one should change that messaging. It's just, if you're inclined towards addiction and end up feeling isolated by your own dishonesty and the lies that you have to tell, that leave you feeling like deep down, if someone says they love you, well, they don't know what I did yesterday, right? So you need that comfort. You really need that comfort, because you will experience very profound loneliness. And so, you know, food, phone, porn, gambling, somewhat risk taking, somewhat, like, I have to watch the whack-a-mole element of this. And I also have to be really honest about, yeah, sure, getting sober from drugs and alcohol were the simplest too, because at least with those you just stop.
Yeah, yeah, I always say that. At least you can just stop them, right? Food's different. You've got to eat every day, right? So,
Yeah,
and
yeah, that's
everything's got
it,
sugar
man.
in it. So if sugar's your drug, right, which is it
Yeah,
tends to be one of mine if I'm not careful.
yeah,
It's in everything. Yeah, well, it's
yeah,
very hard to avoid, right?
yeah. Well, when I first got sober, it was my eating that took me in to recovery. So I was 17. I was about 5'10", and I weighed just over 24 stone. So I was huge. I was what's called morbidly obese.
Wow.
And I ate out of bins, and I ate food that, you know, that had gone off. I ate anything, and in a cycle of shame, around it, you know, around the secrecy and there was no one I was close to who I didn't steal from. All family, all friends, all. So I went into recovery with that, unable to stop. And then there was, we had to fill in forms when you went into the treatment center. I went in, it was 30 questions, and that would help you define if you're an addict. And basically, if you answer more than 10 with a yes, there's a problem. More than 20, you know, you definitely need help. And more than 25, you're doing fucking well to read the form, to be honest. And I got on food, I got 29 out of 30. The only one I said, the only one I said no to was, do you periodically starve yourself in order? And that, I was like, no, not really. I hadn't got to that stage. I had tried purging a few times, but, you know, hadn't really managed to make it work. And with drugs and alcohol, much to my surprise, I got like 26 and 27. You know, I started drinking when I was very young, started using drugs as soon as I could, and sadly in a problematic way from the get-go. So glad that's
do you remember when it started for you? Can you remember like an age where you started to feel?
No,
like
I don't actually. And like all addicts, I've looked at, you know, we're all very keen to pin it. You know, it was this guy, it was this dad, it was this mum, it was this school, it was this thing. And I'm not actually, I am being trivial about that. For some people, there is a great big traumatic, appalling event. I'm so sorry to hear about the loss of your dad. You know, like, it's not to trivialize any of those awful things, but the reality of my addiction is that I would drink on Tuesday because I'd drunk on Monday. Right?
Yeah.
Not because, oh, if I don't drink, hair of the dog and a hangover. I mean, because I drank on Monday, I stole on Monday, and I lied on Monday. So the people who love me and expressed care or concern for me, none of their message got through, because as they tried to express that to me, my internal thing, conscious and unconscious, was, you've no idea. I literally stole from your handbag this morning. So you don't, I am unloved. I don't mean like, oh, I'm a bit unloved. I mean, I am unloved, genuinely, because I've never shown myself to anybody, right? So that's why I drank, and that's why I used drugs and food and all the rest of it. But I had this view of myself for a really long time in recovery, that I had just always been an addict. I'd just been born that way. And then I did some work with a therapist, and it was the opposite of the work I thought we were doing. I thought we were going to look for the root cause, and then we could like chisel it out and get at it. And actually the opposite happened. So it turns out, when I found all of these old pictures of myself as a kid, I was just a normal little boy. Just a normal looking kid, you know. I looked like everyone else, until the eating started to become problematic. And that clearly happened very quickly from about the age of 8 or 9. But I don't remember the point at which I started stealing and lying about all of that. And that's really, it's the shame-based behaviors, or the behaviors that lead you to shame, that will isolate you and exacerbate. If you have an underlying tendency towards addiction, it's your own behavior that makes you an addict, rather than, in my view, it's, you know, who knows for anybody else, but that's what it was for me. So I don't really know. And what's become important for me is to recognize that it's, you know, there was, you know, I went to boarding school when I was really young, when I was 7, and there's no doubt that was traumatic, right? No doubt. And no doubt at all that part of the mechanism I used to find comfort in a place where the comfort I had relied on prior to that point had been withdrawn from me was in food, and fairly soon afterwards in alcohol, and a while after that in drugs. That's true, definitely. But like most people do that, right? Most
Mm.
people have events that happen in their lives with some level of trauma attached to them, and they seek comfort, and that's very wise. Like,
Mm.
that's what we're not just supposed to live in pain, right?
Mm.
We're supposed to
Yeah,
find
yeah.
a way of being, find a way to be okay. And that, so through that, I made peace with my addiction. I was like, it was a fucking good choice. I was really sad and really on my own and really isolated, and I found a way not to be. I found a way to
Yeah.
be okay. That was a good choice. It was sane. Had I known that it would nearly kill me, but, well, I'd have made a different choice. But I
Yeah, yeah,
didn't.
yeah. If perhaps if there was one available though, right? Because I always
Right?
say alcohol in a way saved my life. And at the
Yeah.
time, once I found it, everything else was off the table because I didn't need anything else.
Mm.
I distinctly remember drinking at like 12 or 13 and thinking to myself, I will never let what happened to my dad happen to me because
Yeah.
I need this too much. And as long as like I remember life getting good at 30, 12, 13 when I found alcohol. I remember actually thinking, actually, this could be all right. Having been somebody who was miserable, right? Or,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
struggled desperately with the feelings that you talked about. They went when I drank
Yeah.
till eventually they didn't, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Did your parents help you into recovery? I don't want to patronize you
No,
by
they did.
saying you were 17.
No, mate,
How did
they
you get
did.
into recovery?
They 100% did. I tell you what happened. Uh, a friend of my parents, or like, yeah, some friends of theirs, and had this other guy who has, I believe he's still in recovery, but I don't know. I haven't seen him for a while. But he saw me a couple of years before I got sober, and he said to my mum, he's like, I doubt he's ready just now, but I'm going to give you my number. And when you think Marcus is ready, when you think he's done, give me a call. And I know this is a weird thing to say to you, but I can see he's not in a good way. And then, like, the wheels really came off when I was 17. I was really done for. Like, I was drinking so much, endangering myself. I was using every drug I could lay my hands on, which was not that many because I had no money and I lived in rural Devon, right? And I was
Mm.
eating, like I said, out of bins and God knows what else. And eventually my mum really didn't know what to do. And she phoned him and she went, this might seem mad, but I think Marcus has reached the end of the rope. And he went, cool, okay, here's a guy. And my parents took me to the rehab place, and I didn't physically fight them, but I manipulated the hell out of them all the way there and
Mm.
gave them hell as they drove away and left me there, and it was horrendous. I've talked to them about it since, and they said, like, it was one of the most difficult moments of their entire life. They didn't know what would happen after that. And yeah, so like, without them, I would be dead. And one of the one of the great things about having teenage kids is that the struggles I've had with my parents over the years about forgiveness, it gets really easy once you have teenage kids, because
Mm.
it's really hard to be a parent to a teenage kid, because it's really imprecise. Because what are they? Nearly adults, kind of. They feel like adults. Yeah, I think from the age of about 15, I felt like, oh, so this is adulthood, and there'd be no going back from here. This is how every day will feel. And then you
Mm.
feel different when you're 16, but when you're 16, you're like, well, that wasn't, but this is. And it takes so long before you go, well, none of it is. I'm
Yeah.
I'm nearly 50 and I still don't feel like a grown up, right?
I'm still
But,
winging it. Yeah.
yeah, of
Yeah. I've
course.
got two
And everybody is,
girls as well.
but it
Yeah.
becomes much easier to forgive your parents their shortcomings when A, you're willing to look at your own and be honest about them, and B, real life presents itself to you, and you have a couple of teenage kids who quite inevitably have found the pandemic, um, and lots of other stuff in the last few years really difficult and painful, and you're like, well, I'm the best parent I can be to them today, and I'm way short of what they might need.
Yeah. Do you, do,
Forgive
do,
me.
do you? do you worry about the alcohol with teenage children? How are you in terms of
Yeah, I
they're
worry.
obviously going to be reaching that age when they may start trying it, experimenting. What
I,
kind of,
I
how do you deal
worry.
with that?
I worry that they don't drink enough. Like I genuinely, like young people aren't drinking enough. The pub and club industry is in trouble, for fuck's sake. Don't listen. Those of you who can, get out there and get involved. And I think one of my kids is watching this. Like, listen, like throw in, get involved, take a few risks, and it's okay. It's all right.
Yeah,
You must make those mistakes. Don't. I hope God forbid you become the addict that I was and cause
mm,
harm in your own life or in others. Try not to do that, but for Christ's sake, get out there and get pissed. And
yeah,
I don't want to say too much about my kids because it's not fair on them, right? But generally speaking, yes, of course I worry. What if genetically what if there's an addict gene? I think, by the way, that's really unlikely. I think what's much more likely is the children of people with problems have either the same problems or what I would call response problems.
mm,
You know, the children of codependent parents can sometimes be completely isolated as adults, and sometimes they're also codependent. It depends whether what you learned is to do the same or do the opposite, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
my children have only ever known me in recovery, and I'm enormously grateful for that, and I wouldn't change a single moment of it. And in and of itself, it has its own problems. I think
yeah,
at times I've been too honest with them about stuff, or not too honest. That's a weird way of putting it, but maybe told them more than is sensible
bit of
because I
oversharing
learned,
maybe. Yeah,
right? Yeah, because I learned really early on this is a disease of isolation. And if you share honestly what's going on for you, you are far more likely to find sensible solutions to what you're doing and to feel connected, which is
mm,
in of itself the solution. And also maybe for my kids at various stages along the way, they could have done with knowing a little bit less about what I was going through.
yeah, yeah. I think in the end, so much of parenthood is just about going around with a dustpan and brush, cleaning up whatever mess
Yeah,
they create, like
yeah,
both literally and metaphorically, right? And
yeah,
I'm kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
where I've had to reach with my children is like I need to let them go out and be on their journey, and also make them
Right.
fully aware that I'm
Yeah,
here with the
yeah,
dustpan and brush to sweep it
yeah,
up, regardless. And I think you have to be like that because I remember particularly early when I first stopped drinking, I had this. I put a lot of my hate towards kind of alcohol itself, and I
yeah,
probably back in the beginning would have been alcohol's the problem. My
yeah,
kids will never touch alcohol. Whereas actually
yeah,
today I'm more inclined to be like you, which is go out and try it. Yeah, I'm here. Let's be open about it. Let's discuss. I think
yeah.
I try and be clear. Like if you ever get to a stage where it really becoming a. I try to be. I think I felt a little bit emotional actually when you spoke about the chap who said to your parents when he's ready, come and be here. I almost in a way try and be that. If ever that happens,
Yeah.
I'm here. You know what I mean? And at least I'll know where to
My,
turn.
my parents say, and it's evidenced in everything that they did, that they quietly made the decision that whatever happened, the door would stay open.
Mm,
Right. And what that really means is not necessarily unconditional everything, but just simply that there isn't anything you can do where the door gets closed behind you.
mm,
I'm like, mm-hmm, well, that's about it, isn't it? And I think that might be kind of all there is, actually. I can't guide my kids through a world that I haven't navigated, right?
mm.
Their world is entirely different from the one I was in, because the internet has changed more than we can possibly understand. And so I can't very effectively guide them through it, but I do at least talk to them about screen time, and I talk to them a lot about drugs. And I'm like, look, as far as drugs are concerned, if you ever take a pill, right, what people call a pill, I will kill you. I will be so angry because
Mm,
what's in that, and
mm,
you can't tell me for a second that you don't mind, because I've seen what you're like with food, right?
yeah.
You have a long list of shit you tell me you don't want to eat. Oh, I don't like it. I don't like
Mm.
that, right? Well, if you're about to put something in your body and you don't even know what's in it, then the whole bullshit around food that you claim you don't like, you, you
It's a
can
really good way of looking
you
at
can poke that in your hole, right? Because it's nuts. And the notion of people taking a pill without a clue what's in it is crazy. That's crazy. Or putting stuff up your nose that, whatever it may be. So I'm like, it's not really a discussion about soft drugs or hard drugs or whatever. It's simply if you can know what's in it and the likely effect of what it is, and you decide you want to take it, then great. You know what the likely effect of drinking is.
Mm.
First of all, your inhibitions will be somewhat reduced, and that is likely to be helpful in most social situations. It's why alcohol is such an excellent lubricant for that stuff, and it really is excellent. It's just not for me. Uh,
Yeah.
I had a great therapist who used to say, I was a social drinker. I got so social I couldn't speak. Um, you know, but what was I saying? Yeah, so that like for them, I'm kind of like, well, great. I hope that that's what alcohol is. I also really hope that there are times that they drink, not that they feel ever ashamed about, because shame is so toxic and goes so deep, sits with you for so long, but that they feel like, oh God, oh that was not cool. Because you've got to figure out where your own, where's the outside edge of what's okay for you.
Yeah, yeah. And that they see that feeling, right, for what it is
Yeah,
and change accordingly. Don't do what I did, which is like I literally ruined my life last night and I feel like I'm gonna pass out with how bad I feel today. And
yeah,
I can't wait to get down the pub and do it again, right? That's
yeah.
probably the kind of realization when you're somebody more like me. I'm conscious of time and I wanna bring it back to the red, to the play a little
Yeah.
bit, just for a moment before we kind of get towards wrapping things up. How did your dad has your dad seen the
Uh,
play?
yeah, this is the big question.
Mm,
So the first iteration of the play, uh, sorry, that's the big question for me, because it was the front and center of what was on my mind as I wrote it. Because some of the comedy I've done and the book I wrote about theology and faith and stuff was so hurtful to my parents, like caused them
mm,
so much pain and shame. And I was desperate that the play did not do that, but that I was still capable of being honest. They listened to the play when it was broadcast on Radio 4, and mercifully they loved it, and it's brought my dad and I closer, and
wow.
it's helped me to be a bit more honest with all of my family about the way in which not drinking can be a bit of a separating force. And so they really loved the play, and I hope, they haven't said specifically, but I hope that for anyone who sees the play, that there are a few moments in it when you look at an addict either in their addiction or in recovery, that might help to understand, like, what is the machinery. It's no one's fault, right? It just is a thing that happens. It might help to understand the machinery of why we negotiate with ourselves to make what are very obviously harmful decisions,
Mm,
around whatever our next choice is. Like shame. We describe people sometimes as shameless, and in politics, clearly that's true. But let's not get bogged down. uh, um, but shame is not, unfortunately, for an addict, ever the reason why they change their behavior,
mm,
right? So you don't go, well, you know I stole from all these people, I got drunk and I attacked someone. I didn't mean to, but I kind of did. Or I drove and I hurt someone or killed someone, as it happens. Unfortunately, shame does not act as the great changer that a sane person would, would be able to use it to those ends. Shame just goes inwards and just drags you down and isolates you from those around you. Because if you've been drinking or using drugs or whatever it may be, you've lost the ability to explain to anybody what you're going through. You've lost that connection already, because the greatest comfort you find is in the thing that makes you feel better, which is alcohol or drugs or whatever. So you can't do anything with shame. And I really hope that what's in the red helps people understand about that little thing that happens. There's a bit where Benedict's talking about drinking, and he says it's a bit like being on a slide, and I didn't really think about how I'd got on the slide, and I didn't really think about what would happen when I reached the end of the slide. I just slid. And then the slide ran out, and all my skin came off. And to me, like, that's such a clear description of what happened. You're just in this thing and you're just sliding, and a lot of it's fun, let's be honest.
Yeah,
really fun, otherwise we'd stop much sooner, right? And then suddenly it isn't fun, and you've reached the bottom of the slide and you're slipping not across something slippery but across gravel, and all your skin comes off and you look, there's a mess, and it's so yeah, as with all of them, a very long answer to your question, but fundamentally, yeah, my mum and dad love the play. I love them. I forgive them all their shortcomings, and they've forgiven me all of mine, which is pretty awesome. It's not to say we have a perfect relationship, we don't, but and I'm really proud of the red as a piece of work, really proud of it, because I very much wanted to write it with something really specific in mind, and I was not sure whether I would convey the message clearly enough, and I think it does, and I know that everybody who watches it has a very different conclusion. It's really interesting. A lot of people in recovery have been to see it, and obviously Benedict is negotiating with himself about whether to drink or not, and a lot of people leave going, well, I left feeling he should, that it was time. He's been sober for 25 years or so, and he should definitely give it a go. He seemed okay to me. And others going like, oh God, no. And I literally, one time I was watching it when we put it on at the Edinburgh Festival a few years ago, and one of the moments where his father appears to be coaxing him towards the booze, I heard a woman in front of me go, he's the devil. Like, he isn't. He's just, he's just his dad, and he's just trying to love him. He's just trying to love him in one of the many ways that he knows he can.
Yeah, I've got to see it. Where can people see it? Where do we see the play?
I should have prepared an answer to that.
We'll be putting it all in the
I
links.
tell you what,
the
original theatre company have just filmed with Bruce and Sam Alexander, who are a real father and son, playing father and son, and are both phenomenal actors, just phenomenal. They're playing the roles, and the original theatre company have filmed it beautifully, absolutely beautifully, and it will be available through the original theatre company website. Look up the Red Original Theatre Company, and
we're going to put all that.
Yeah.
So there's a discount code for Nacoa people as well. So
yeah, and what's really cool is like, as a play, it was done pros arch, and there it was. But with being able to film it, we've been able to get in really close, and there's the father, the son, and the third character in the play, which is this absolutely phenomenal bottle of wine. There we are. Someone's answered. The Red is streamed on demand by Original Theatre Company from 7:30 on the 16th of March to the 16th of June.
Which is exactly where you were getting to, right?
That's where I was going. Answer. Thank you, Becky. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get to, right, though, is that it can be watched online, because that's, I don't know, is that like a new thing?
Yes, and this is
Yeah,
one of the great things that's come out of the pandemic is that
yeah,
artists, you know, the smart and positive artists went, okay, cool. The world around us has changed. Our stories are still available, and here they are. And the original theatre company grabbed this and ran with it, and here it is. And I'm so glad, because the plan had been to tour the play and all the rest of it, and because of the pandemic, it's not been possible. So yeah,
brilliant, brilliant.
yeah,
Well, I shall certainly look forward to watching it
good,
myself when it comes on demand.
yeah.
Um, the one question I want to ask you before I let you go, and I realise we've gone very long here, but I ask everybody that comes on here, if you could speak to the young boy that you were, let's say when you were 11 or 12, just before the chaos and the madness, what would you say to the young boy that you were then?
I'd say be careful how much you emotionally invest in Morrissey. He turns out to be a baddie. Uh, no, in more seriousness, I would say the things that are happening to you and the things that you feel are not your fault, and sadly, there'd be no way of convincing that little guy, who was a really sad little fella. But I try hard to explain to him what I felt certainly within 48 hours, but probably within 24 hours of getting into recovery. You are not alone.
Yeah,
That's what.
beautiful. And it's such a good way to end, because it's almost become Nacoa's strapline, which is to let young children that are struggling with, what we support them with when they've got a parent that perhaps drinks too much. One of our main objectives is to let them know that they're not alone. So it's a fitting way.
It's so important, because as soon as
Mm,
you think you are alone, then you are. And the
yeah,
more you think you're alone, the more it becomes difficult to form connections with those around you. And then, it becomes true. It's not, people aren't wrong when they feel like they're alone. If you feel like you're alone, then you are. But there is another reality that's so close by. And for me, it was just finding, like, I couldn't believe when I found people who had done the same things that I'd done and felt the same way. And better than all of that was that there was a way out. There was a way out.
yeah,
And I'm still, here we are 30 something years later, I'm still in the way out, and really happy. So
yeah.
my
That's amazing.
life is so beautiful. It's really difficult at the moment, really tough,
Yeah,
and it's brilliant. I love it.
yeah. I love that, and it's so good, and I just think for people to see somebody like yourself to talk about having 30 years recovery in that way is
Yeah,
just
it works
incredible.
a day at a time, right?
Yeah, it's inspiring. It's inspiring, really. 30 years. Wow.
Thanks, man.
Um,
Thank you.
so
And
look,
it's
I've really enjoyed this.
been really cool.
Yeah, I
Really,
appreciate
really
it. And
cool.
we
Thank you for
we
having
really
me.
appreciate at Nacoa that Hillary, our CEO, did put a little while back on here. She really appreciates you doing this for us.
Pleasure. And if
It'll mean a
people
lot.
want to, like, I've got a new baby and a couple of kids and a lovely wife. But if people want to ask anything, just fire questions at me on Insta, and I'll get back to you in the end. It may take a while.
Yeah, no, you're a good man. You're a good man. I really appreciate it. And
Thanks,
I'll
buddy.
let you get back to your lovely family, and we'll hopefully see you at Nacoa soon. All right?
Absolutely. God bless you.
Take care.
Take it easy.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Bye bye.